going on, everyone? It's your guy, Cole Jackson, back with another episode here on Two Guys Watching Football, where I am joined by Ian Cummings from Pro Football Network. I'm excited to bring you, we'll call it a little mini series here. It's called How to Scout. And what I'm looking to do is bring on some different evaluators. We're kind of in the dog days of April. The next 4 weeks are going to drag. I thought, let's get some of these great evaluators that are doing work out there at, the different national sites, doing work on Twitter. Let's get them in here and let's talk about their evaluation process. And so that brings me to Ian. Ian, my guy, how's it going?
It's going good, man. It's going good. Another day of tape watching. I mean, as you know, when you're in April, that's all you're doing, making sure that you're tying the bow, kind of wrapping up the class and, trying to get to guys that you haven't watched yet or guys that, you have an impression of but want to solidify. So that's been the process for me just every day now. And we got 3.5 weeks, I think, until the event, the big event. And I'm trying to make the most of all the seconds that we have leading up to that because there's so much information to cover.
It really does give you respect for guys like Dane Brugler putting out the beast and Lance Zierlein, who, they get 300, 400 profiles out there. And, now I'm starting to watch, Josh Ross at Michigan tape and get into the special teamers tape because that's just where we're at in the process. So, no, it's been a blast. And so, I came across your work on Twitter because you're doing some awesome traits-based analysis. Why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this, and we'll kind of get into your grading system.
Yeah, so I guess a little bit about me, my background. I started in college. I think I was a freshman in college, so it was like 5 or 6 years ago. And I was like, yeah, I needed a part-time job, and Fansided was, they had an opportunity where you could apply. And at the time, I was like, I like sports, I like writing. Why not try and combine the two? And then that's how it started. I was actually writing for Washington first because I'm from Michigan. I live 15 minutes from East Lansing. I was a big Kirk Cousins fan. I grew up watching him, right? So naturally, I kind of gravitated to that team, and I was writing for them. And over the years, I started to dabble in the draft a little bit more, and then PFN reached out. I can't remember. It had to be 2 years ago now. Time flies, I swear. But they reached out, and I eventually joined them. I was an editor, just a mere editor at first. I shouldn't say mere because they are very important. They're the offensive linemen of this site, if you know, man. I mean, nothing gets by these guys, So it's a big role to fill. But I started as that, and then I wrote some draft pieces, and then it kind of just grew to where it is now. Working, writing scouting reports full time, and just kind of analyzing the class as a whole. So that's kind of how it started and how it's developed into what it is.
That's great. A true blue class or blue collar story. I love it. And yeah, my editor used to. So like I was just telling Ian, and obviously you guys watching know by now, I'm Canadian. So when I used to write for Russell Street Report, my editor wanted to kill me because I spell everything Canadian, color with a U, and so I used to get into this problem when I'd spell C.J. Mosley's name. It's just like the way you would spell Mosley up here is different than in the US. And he used to kill me because I spelled his name wrong. He's like, he's one of our best players. You can never spell his name right. What are you doing? So yeah, the editors are the glue that hold these publications together. But yeah, and now I want to dive right in because, like I said, I mean, I've always been big into traits-based analysis. I always, I like to see the Scouting Academy as a great blueprint. They have different traits that, go to certain positions. And I'm one of those guys where I watch film and, I do all of that in my head, but I don't formally put it together. And then you took it the next step. And really what I thought popped was, doing the weighted. So I'm going to share it right now. So I just picked two at random here. So I grabbed Jermaine Johnson, Andrew Booth, two guys that Ravens fans love. So why don't you kind of walk us through? And I know the big thing that stands out here is the traits in the left-hand column obviously will be different by position, which makes perfect sense. Different traits are, more relevant to certain positions. So, how did you come up with these traits and kind of walk us through the multiplier and just take us through the whole kind of development process?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess where it started is I was, last year and last cycle, I originally started without a grading scale because to me, I was thinking to myself, how can you make a number convey everything, in the draft evaluation process? And even now, that's something that I'm still working on, right? But this was the first offseason where I was like, hey, because you're doing top 300 big boards, right? How do you find the separation for player 114 and 115? Like it can be so arbitrary. So that's why I was like, it would be nice to be able to quantify the analysis in some respect and then get some separation, and get some clarity there. So I started exploring this. And this was something I was experimenting with in the summer, and I kind of tinkered with it, and then kind of released it this winter and beginning of spring. But really, what it is trying to find the traits that are most important for a given position, like you said. And I try to break it down into, if I can pull up I wrote a little bit about it here, but some foundational versus developmental traits, which foundational
Right.
traits, like explosiveness, speed, things that, usually, I mean, guys can cut down weight and maybe glean more athleticism from their frame, but usually you're not going to improve that a ton over the course of your professional career. Usually that's kind of set in stone. So foundational versus developmental. So like processing for corners, like more film study, ideally you can improve that, ball or technique as well. If you're kind of working on your craft, you can improve that as well. Now, those are still important. So they're not at the very bottom, because then that goes to primary or preferred. I think it was integral or secondary was the categories that I used. Traits that are, exceedingly important for a given position, and the traits that are secondary to that position for success, like still important, but lower on the chart. And so kind of with that framework is how I ranked them. And, from those ranks, I kind of added weights and prescribed weights to each one. And I'm still kind of working on the weights. What I'm going to do here is I kind of just weight them based on, how I view them and the importance that I put. Like you'll see here, for corner, you've got explosiveness, hip fluidity, agility. It's spread out a little bit more there than it is for edge rusher with explosiveness,
Right.
bend, and power. Because I think, having an edge rusher with that elite first step is just a little bit more important, because you can do so much stuff off of that. Whereas with a corner, you can't just be explosive. You got to be able to have transitions as well. You got to be agile. You got to be able to, keep that balance through transitions. So for me, kind of calculating those weights together, all the traits are going to have a certain weight, right? Because they all matter. They all kind of add up to the full 100%. But, kind of gauging how important they are, by position is how I kind of came up with those. So, and that's something that I'm going to reevaluate, after the cycle, kind of look at the results and see, should I weigh this trade a little bit more or a little bit less, or should I kind of change the hierarchy here? But the only way to do that, to reevaluate, is to put these scales out in the first place. So, this is kind of the foundation, kind of getting the results and see how you can act on that.
Yeah, I think the best part about that is, just how, the big thing is, like, say you and I disagree on a player. It's like, okay, we can talk that through, or you could just show this, and like we could literally find where we disagree, because I could kind of, and that's where you can get into comparative analysis and stuff. So I think that's what really stands out to me about this, and it's more just like how transparent it is. I find that at this time of year it can be tough, because it's like, I'm not high on Jermaine Johnson. Okay, why? Well, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't really speak to anything. But when you get this detailed, you can actually start to tease out where exactly you disagree. And it just puts everything on paper. I know with, a piece like with the grading scale with, well, compared to Pro Football Focus, PFF puts out their grades, and it's a number, and you don't have any clue really what makes up that number. It's just a number. And so with this one, you put out your grade, and then you give the exact breakdown. So we can kind of look through and pick and nitpick. And I know you're not looking for people to nitpick necessarily,
Yeah.
but I love the transparency. That's what really stood out to me. And it really does, you create some really good discussions, and, what are the most important traits, and, what, how can that evolve over time, and how can we change weighting? And I think that doing that kind of engagement and being, we'll say open enough to changes, I think is a fantastic part of a process, because it's just always going to get better, get stronger. So, huge kudos to that, because it's not easy. I find it gets tough in the draft community, because we're going to kind of get into, nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to miss. Nobody wants to, but everybody misses constantly.
Yeah.
I've had so many conversations.
It's a vital part of the learning process.
Exactly.
And
then you go back, and it's like, okay, what did I miss? We were talking about, here in the Ravens community, we were talking about a guy like Tyree Phillips, because when the Ravens drafted Tyree Phillips, I went back to his tape and worked, one of the guys, Michael Crawford at Abukari on Twitter, that I work so closely with. We both went back to his film, and, we both kind of came away with different reasons why we thought he could translate to being a tackle at the NFL level. And us Ravens fans have learned over the last 2 years that he's probably a guard. And so it begs the question, what did we see that made us think that? And is there something to learn there and so, like, one of my takeaways when I went back to his film, and I don't know if you look at this with offensive linemen, but it was actually that hip fluidity piece because he really struggled in his vertical sets to square guys up on the edge. And so that was something that I kind of learned and I'm starting to look for. And that's why I'm really high on a guy like a Rasheed Walker, because you see so much nuance in his pass set. You see so much hip fluidity. He's able to square guys up consistently. And so it's, taking those learnings and translating them into future draft years. It's going to make you a stronger evaluator, more thorough process. So I think that part of it is so cool.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so
It's all about applying, what you see ultimately at the end of the day. And going back to what you said about, having people nitpick. Like I enjoy when people nitpick as well, because me personally, like I'm still pretty early into this. So I know there's people who've been watching film longer, been seeing more things. So like if you see something that I haven't seen, I want to know that, because at the end of the day, watching film is a subjective process. As much as we try, like these numbers make it seem objective, but these numbers are formed from subjective analysis too. So
right.
That's the root of it. So when it's all subjective, we're all kind of just seeing different things. It's always good to have feedback, good or bad, because ultimately it's constructive at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. That was excellent. And then the other piece I want to get into is a little bit about your evaluation so far, because so I picked 3 positions that are high need for the Ravens, and I kind of want to pick your brain on them. So we'll start with offensive tackle. And so to start, give me 2 offensive tackles you see in this draft class that you're higher on than the consensus. So, I mean, we all know that, we're seeing the same mock drafts all over and over and over again. So we'll just call the consensus kind of those big boards. But, give me 2 offensive tackles that you're higher on than the consensus.
I would say one is Matt Waletzko out of North Dakota. He's a fun player. I know he tested very well. He's very athletic, and it shows up on tape. I think another thing that shows up on tape is the easy athleticism. The dude moves very, very effortlessly. He glides, and he's got, I think, 36-inch arms and 85-inch wingspan. So a long dude who covers a lot of ground with that reach, and makes it really hard for edge rushers to get their hands on him. And he can just anchor them, and just he's got the athleticism to match as well. I know he showed up at the Senior Bowl. He was around, I think, a little over 300. And one of my concerns at the FCS level is that he was under 300. But he came there, put on some weight and still retained that athleticism and actually looked like he belonged. So, I still got to put together my grading scale for offensive tackles. That's one position that I have yet to get to with the grades, and I'll start posting them on Twitter when I do. But, the knee bend, I think with him, especially being 6'7", if you're an offensive tackle, you got to bend those knees. You got to get that proper leverage, because if you play too tall, you open up your torso, they can get inside you and get around you. So it's one of those things where, I like that for his size. He's very natural, very flexible, and able to bend those knees and get that proper leverage, and then use that length to get a hand on guys, keep himself clean. I really like that part of his game, and he's been rising for me. I think he's got the tools to be, a starter down the road. He's got the athleticism and the length and all the raw ability. For another tackle, if I could pick another one, it's tough. I mean, Zach Tom is one that I've been looking at, and I gotta do a deep dive on him. But Wake Forest, I think, the thing that really gets me with him, again, very athletic. Not the largest guy, but he's got a good frame. He's pretty dense, pretty compact, and his pass sets, from what I've seen, are very smooth. His hands are independent, which you love to see.
He's a battler.
Yeah, exactly. He's a battler, dude. Like you love to see that. Like, don't get me wrong, there is a time and a place for those 2-hand extensions, but you don't want to be reliant on those, because sometimes that can lock your hips out, like you said, and then you're stuck and the guy can get around you. I love the independent hands, because at the same time, it keeps you free, it keeps you flowing, and at the same time you can negate those punches and really just submit, just drive that edge rusher into submission. So I love that part of his game, but at the same time, so smooth, well leveraged. He's got that ability. So I'm a fan of his. Again, I'm excited to run his grade through once I get that scale together, because there's been some players where I run their grade through and I knew I had a high opinion of them, but then that grade comes in and all of a sudden they're like way higher than I thought they'd be. And like I'm running with it this year, because at the end of the day, you got to run with it. You can't conform you can't like change it after the fact because it doesn't align with the consensus. You got to run with what you see and then learn from it, whether it's good or bad. So it's one of those things where I've had some surprising grades, but at the end of the day, that's how you learn. So Zach Tom is one that I'm very excited to get to, because I know he's got a lot of good traits, and at the end of the day, it could add up to a surprising grade on there.
Right. Yeah. And Zach Tom was an interesting guy, and can't remember the name, but they have a redshirt freshman that's a right tackle. And both of them popped when I was actually watching Jermaine Johnson, because I thought that was one of the tougher games Jermaine had this year was just
Yeah.
against Wake Forest in general, and I couldn't get over the way both of them battled. Zach Tom reminded me a ton of Patrick McCary, the Ravens. Right tackle last year, might be their center this year. And I know that's kind of the narrative around Zach Tom, shorter armed guy, probably going to move inside. But when you're able to battle like that, use your hands, I thought they both did a really good job of getting off the ball. That's what they say, right? Best thing you can do as a tackle is get off the line and get out to your man. And he's fluid. He's got good hand usage. Pretty darn athletic. So I think he's got real shot to be a tackle in the league. And Waletzko's an interesting guy because I thought what we saw at the Senior Bowl a bit, and I think this kind of speaks to what you said earlier about, having foundational traits and developmental traits, because one of his developmental traits is that I thought needs to be improved is his anchor, but you kind of already hit on it. Just natural weight is probably part of that issue. When you're tall like that, you're always going to have leverage issues. Just guys are naturally going to be able to get up under your pads, and as you kind of fill out your frame, and that's what I saw with Waletzko. He has a frame that I can see really filling out once he spends some time. And a lot different going from North Dakota down to an NFL weight room. And I know that because North Dakota may as well be in Canada, so it's basically like a weight room we have up here. And so I think that's one of the big things as he starts to add. And I thought you saw a little bit of it at the Senior Bowl. He had a little bit of a better anchor than when you saw him take on true bulls at the FCS level. So, and I mean, I remember when the Senior Bowl list came out, I hadn't really started getting through everyone yet. And first thing I do as soon as the measurements come out, it's like, all right, who's got freakish kind of length? And, is anyone kind of pop? And I looked, and I was like, this guy measured at like 30, I think he was over 36, like 36 and a half. So I was like, and he's 6'8". I was like, oh, you're going to have to give him a good peek. And I think his weight actually increased from the Senior Bowl to the Combine. So, and
I remember I interviewed him, and he was saying he wanted to be around 312, I think, in the NFL, which I think is a healthy weight for him.
I got it right in front of me, and that's what he came into at the Combine.
Yeah, so there we go.
That's impressive. Those are two great examples. And then so we'll stick with tackles, and let's go two guys you might be lower on than the consensus.
Lower on, I would say Trevor Penning is probably one. I love the he seems like a polarizing guy.
Our fan base just cheered.
I mean, Ravens like, oh yeah, that's right, I'll drop to 14 now, right? But like it's one of those things where everyone gets enamored by, and I'll admit, like, I still got to finalize it, and there are some things that I could consider a little bit more, I think, in my evaluation. But looking at what I've seen personally, I think he's very reliant on that. That physical strength, just out muscling guys, can be a little reckless sometimes. So that concerns me a little bit. At the same time as well, at the Senior Bowl, I feel like this was kind of magnified. He doesn't always move his feet. Sometimes the feet stop moving, and then the edge rushers get around him. He can play with his pad level a little too high. So he makes some iffy reps look pretty good just by pushing guys after the fact, So, which, don't get me wrong, I want my tackles to have that physical edge, and he definitely has the athleticism for sure. I mean, that's not a question. But I do think there is a little bit more to clean up, and you see him in this top 10 conversation even. I think that's a little too high for him. I still think he's a first-round guy, but that's a little too high for me personally.
You're nailing it on him because he was one of the first guys I did a film room on, and I did it with my buddy Mike, and we kind of came away with, well, he's a first rounder, but is he worth 14? And I think my overall opinion is, like, in a trade back option, would love it. Like, take him at like 22, 23. That would feel okay because he does have, he's got the length, he's got the strength, he's got the height, he's got some of the prerequisites that you do want to see. I was shocked by some of his measurables. I thought he really struggled in space, especially they run a lot of the outside zone. I thought he was really poor getting back into his shoot and engaging guys. So that popped to me. And there's no way that 3-cone was, indicative of his tape, because the man can't bend. I don't know if he just perfected the steps in the 3-cone.
The 3-cone is interesting. I feel like the 3-cone, the more I see it, it seems less and less translatable. It's a valuable test. But Aiden Hutchinson was another one. I didn't think he had great bend on tape. So, and he comes in with this massive 3-cone. It's like, all right, like I'm glad you tested well in that, but I'm not sure it's 100% translatable to what you need to do at this position. So it's one of those things where you take the numbers into account, but that's why I'm not calculating them into my grades
Film
just
always
yet.
reigns supreme, right?
Yeah,
Like to
exactly.
give you something to go back and take a look at, give a little bit. Because one thing, one of the guys I do a lot of work with mentioned is, he kind of sees it as, you can unlock certain pieces, like you can unlock better agility just by training for the 3 cone.
Yeah.
So in that you're kind of working on your hip fluidity and that sort of thing. But until you see it on tape, it's hard to put a whole lot of weight into that. Especially you're out of pads, it's a different movement, but you can see it. Like he typically would, he would take a couple kick steps, and then you see him consistently open his hips outside because he was trying to cheat a little bit, and that would open that inside pass rush lane, where he'd be kind of stuck with a stop sign but no kind of body, like he didn't have a post step to throw up there. So that was something that really popped to me on Penning. But I think it's funny you said that, because actually Ravens fans hate him at 14. Nobody wants to take him at 14. Nobody sees him worth being 14. But I think a lot of us would feel okay with a trade back and get him. But that's a good one. Do you have another one that you could throw out there for tackle?
It's tough, man, because there's not a lot of tackles that I'm lower on, I guess, if I had
It's
to
a
pick.
strong class, man.
Yeah, it is. And like, here's the thing, like Tyler Smith is another one I could bring up because I feel like he's a little similar in that the Tulsa. I think it's better. He's a redshirt sophomore. He's young. He's clearly learning, and he's athletic. I mean, I think he has a little better lateral athleticism than Trevor Penning for sure. I think he's got better recovery athleticism. Gets off quick, super violent. He's another mauler. We love those guys. But I think the synergy with his lower and upper body can be a little rough sometimes. Doesn't always time those punches with his base, and that can render him off balance, stuff like that. So just technical things that he needs to work on. I like him, but we're hearing round 1. I don't know if I like that. I really
I
like the
agree.
player. It's just,
I had a hard time with him, and so the reason I struggled with him is because I watched Chris Paul,
yeah.
and Chris Paul's pretty clean technically. Like he doesn't have the physical gifts of a Tyler Smith, but technically speaking, he's pretty clean. So it's like, how does Tyler Smith constantly have, I always say, hands in his pockets, because you watch him come off the ball and his hands are literally at his hips, and I'm like, what are you doing? And then he misses all of his punches, and so it's like, I just can't figure out why the right tackle has no issues and the left tackle has all the issues. So it's been a tough kind of. I went from being really low on him. Then I really watched him and I kind of got higher on him. But then when I went back and watched him again, I started to get low on him again. So I think he's a good one, and I've heard people kind of refer to him as we'll call him the great value Trevor Penning, because all those things that you want in Trevor Penning, the physicality, tone setter, you could just get him round 2 with the Tyler Smith maybe. So I think that does make sense. And we'll switch gears, get into some edge players, because I've seen you've done your write-ups on them. There's a couple guys that really popped in your top 10 ranking when I took a look at it. So we'll start again. 2 guys that you're higher on than the consensus with edge rushers.
I'll start with Arnold Ebiketie, Penn State. He was someone that came in. I know that one of those guys who, I knew I liked him coming into my grading, and then I put the numbers in and I crunch them through and I double check them 3 times. And it's like, wait a second, this guy's got a way bigger number than I thought. And like, I'm okay with it because, I do think he's a very complete player. And I think that's kind of where his strong grade came, is that there's really not a lot of holes to poke into his game. I mean, maybe one you could is his size. Like, he's not the biggest guy, right? He's only around 6'2", 251 pounds, which is dense for 251. And if he's going to be a stand-up edge rusher, I like that too. And then at the same time, he's got 34-inch arms. So one thing that I try to incorporate, and I'm going to, explore, because I know relative athletic score, RAS, my guy Kent, math bomb, he's so good at that stuff, kind of weighing it on historical data. But, here's the thing, 6'2", 251 is definitely on the smaller side, but 34-inch arms, that's very good proportional length. And that shows up on tape, where he's able to, extend and get into guys' torsos and generate that power. He's explosive. He's got good ankle flexion. He can get around the edge, and he can use his hands around the edge. That's an important thing, like not just having the explosiveness to get to the apex, but having the precise and violent hand usage to bat away those anchors and dip under the corner. And Ebiketie's shown he can do that on tape. I think he's got a lot of the traits that I like in an edge rusher, even if he's a little smaller. It's a complete profile. And I think that's what kind of weighed him up. So I'm a little higher on him, but I do like the traits that are there, and especially the high motor. I mean, this dude never quits. He's always giving 100%. He's always coming downhill with a ton of heat. So I like him a lot for that reason.
Yeah, I love Ebiketie. Saw him a little bit at no, he wasn't at Penn State last year.
He
Where
was
was he
at
last?
Temple the year before.
Temple, that's
Yeah.
right. I forget who I was watching last year, but he popped. He's one of those guys with a nice first step. I thought he did some really good work against. Who's the guy I was watching the other night? Petit Frere. He gave him a headaches.
Yeah.
Just with he was manipulating a set point, and Petit Frere kind of plays with guard feet, so I thought that kind of worked in his favor. But just kind of the way he has a pretty nuanced pass rush plan, and that was something that really popped out to me. So yeah, and one of those things, and I thought I'm just checking the chart right now that you did really well that I wanted to throw out there because I'm big on. You'll hear me say over and over again, arm length doesn't matter. That's just my thing. I'm 5'8". I played offensive line. That's probably why. I got little T-Rex arms here. But you have it down here. You have balance and leverage, and you have hand usage, and those two things to me, and you hear guys say it all the time, it's all about your hand skill, not your arm length. Arm length matters. I'm just kind of being a dink about it, but I love how you have it broken down like that because creation of leverage and hand usage as like a counter game as two separate traits within an edge rusher profile makes so much sense to me. So love that you had that, and again, it's down there with things that can be developed, which I think also makes perfect sense. So, I thought that was really neat that you had that. So who's another one that you're higher on?
Shoot, man. I mean, another one I'm higher. I love this edge class, man. There's so many
It's
guys.
deep.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's such a good class. I mean,
Well, let me pick one for you because you
yeah,
had a guy ranked number one that I was like, yes, someone's doing it. Someone's taking the leap.
yeah.
And that was Jermaine Johnson was your DN1.
Yeah, he's really fun. I mean, he's in my top 10 players. I mean, I again, it kind of just revolves around really solid profile, not a lot of weaknesses. I mean, I was watching this guy's tape and, it obviously tested very well. He's got really good size, which again, if you have the physical traits, that's great, but at the same time, he's very good from an executional standpoint. I mean, this is a guy who again is really able to win around the apex with those quick timed hand moves. He's got strong hands. That's the one thing that I really
Yeah.
like that really popped out to me is that when he gets anchored too, like he can disengage very well. He's very good at deconstructing those blocks and then surging into the pocket after that. I just love the timing and the force. It's all kind of coupled together with him. And then he does have pretty good ankle flexion as well for his size. Like I don't think there's really a ton of holes you can poke in his game. Kind of similar to Ebiketie, but then I do think Johnson has the size advantage on him,
Right.
which boosts him up for sure. So for me, it's just and a run defense as well. I mean, very good at setting the half man relationship, really good feel for positioning and how to clog those lanes, and just very instinctive defender overall at the edge, using his traits effectively. I love that about him. So he's a solid player for me, definitely in that top range. And I see very few avenues where he's not successful in the NFL. I just think a very solid player who has a pretty high ceiling too, high floor, high ceiling. That's a good thing to bank on.
Completely agree. I always say you'll see a guy like, we'll take a Trayvon Walker because he's got a really strong jab in the pass rush game. Like he's going to be
Yeah.
a power rusher in the sense that, he's going to be able to jack you under your pads. He's got good explosiveness, good first step. He's going to be able to put together that, but does he have that hook, that speed rush game? And you take a guy like Karlaftis, same thing. He's, going to be, he's got one of probably the most nuanced pass rush plan with how he'll beat you with, creation of leverage and hand counters off of the leverage point. But is he going to be able to beat you around the edge? And that's what I saw with Jermaine Johnson that really stood out against some of his peers. Is he's got the hook, he's got the jab, he's just got the complete package. And I would even put like, I don't know if Aiden Hutchinson has the complete package. Like, I don't know if he's going to be able to kind of have that speed rush game the way Jermaine Johnson was. So when I saw you had him ranked above him, I was like, no one's willing to take that leap of faith. So I respected the hell out of that. So, and we'll kind of work off this, and we can just pick one, but one guy in the edge class you're lower on than the
Yeah.
consensus.
I mean, we've talked about. I can bring up two. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson and Trayvon Walker. I mean, those are two guys where with Hutchinson, it's interesting because I don't think the hands are perfect. That's one thing that always gets brought up as a strength, and I do think he has a working understanding of how to manipulate tackles. Right, like we saw against Iowa was a great example of that speed to bull. Take those couple steps upfield and force that tackle to open his hips, and then surge into his torso and drive him back. Right, so he understands that. But I don't think he has precise hands all the time. I don't think he has a pass rush plan all the time. He's got a high motor for sure, but sometimes he just comes downhill. And then on top of that too, I think his leverage can be inconsistent. He comes off with a high pad level a lot, not really good at lowering those pads and shooting those pads into contact. So that was one thing that kind of stood out to me. And his hips are a little stiff around the apex as well. I don't think he has an elite burst either. Like I think he has really good explosiveness. Don't get me wrong. I think he has the capacity for that. But again, I think part of it stems from him coming off the line upright a lot, kind of saps at his explosiveness. I'd like him to, be a little lower and kind of shoot off, but he doesn't always do that. And then when he's upright, you lose that leverage and you get stymied pretty easily. So with Hutchinson, I think, he's definitely violent. He's definitely a high motor guy. He's physical. But right now, it just seems a lot of his plays were second effort plays where, yeah, he's relentless, right? But how sustainable is that going to be at the NFL level? That's the thing that gets me with him. And then with Trayvon Walker, you kind of said it, right? He's a power rusher, right? I think especially if you're flexible with him, like Georgia was early on, move him around, just kind of let him be that ice pick. That can be a good role for him. But can he develop into a full-time edge rusher with that palette of moves? Right now, he's just a power guy, and doesn't really have that, that functional set, that hand usage arsenal. So I'm a little worried about that. I do think with the right coaching, you can mold him into something more. But right now, it's a lot of projection, a little too much for me to take him top 10.
And that's the thing. It's not necessarily like he's got all the tools, and he's a ball of clay for a coach. But you can take that top 5 where he's kind of going now. Like they're talking about number 3 overall. And I know that some of that's because he seems like a Lovie Smith guy, and he's now in Houston, so I kind of get that relationship of it. But I kind of think, the athletic testing got a little bit, we kind of forgot that, this man has games and games and games of, and I know everyone points to, it's the Georgia defense. Kirby Smart keeps things really tight, and this was his role. And I think that is true. Like you see him do a lot of the dirty work on the inside, opening pass rush lane. So that's relevant. But there's enough snaps where he's a true pass rusher at, the 6 tech, and he's standing up, and he doesn't have pass rush plan. Like that's just the reality. So I mean, to take him, top 5 with those kind of concerns, he's gonna be a high floor player. He's gonna get on the field because he's probably the best. Like him and Jermaine Johnson have the best long arms in this class. The way they set, like, I mean, Trayvon Walker bullied Kennard and Rosenthal in that Kentucky game. Like that was mean what he did to those two. Yeah, there's no pass rush plan right now. And so you're taking a leap of faith that your coaching staff's going to be able to do that. And if you want to do that in the top 5, feel free, but it's not necessarily for me. So let's shift gears. Let's get into 2 corners that you're kind of higher on than the consensus.
Yeah, I think Andrew Booth is one. I mean, we brought him up earlier. I mean, to me, it's really interesting because I see mock drafts where he falls out around 1. And I was like, I hadn't finalized him yet. So I was like, all right, finalize him. We'll get to the bottom of this. We'll see. And I mean, he can clean up his technique a little bit. He can be a little bit more controlled with his, his back pedal, when he's out. Sometimes receivers, when they get that jab step in, can work him a little bit too much over to the other side. But overall, man, I mean, the physical traits are all there. I mean, what I look for with a corner, fluidity is there, explosiveness. The dude closes so quickly. And then at the line, the corrective twitch is the word that I like to use. I mean, he's such a fast, amped up mover. Like you really can't get a step on him because he's just so fast and so quick to recover. He's got a long frame. He's got really good ball skills when it's in the air. Playmaking abilities there. And then his run support, man, is fun. I feel like people don't talk about it enough, but he is elite in run support. I mean, he's coming downhill every play.
He wants to smoke.
He wants to smoke. He wants all the smoke, man. And he's a good processor too. Like that's the thing. Like things that I try to look for with processing for corners, especially like in zone, is a good example. Like how quickly do you react to breaks? In run support, how quickly do you diagnose the play and react to it? And there's plays where the quarterback, like a screen, right? The quarterback hasn't even thrown it, and Booth is already keyed into the formation. He's charging downhill and making that tackle. That was the funnest thing, the end zone angle, the all 22. Right when the camera snaps to the left or right, Booth is there making the tackle and run support. So
did you watch the NC State game this year?
I think so, yeah.
There's one. It's the end zone angle on the right side of the screen, and Icky gets out on it's a left side of their offensive formation screen, and Icky's kicking out. Icky got a lick on him, and it sent him to the sideline. But Booth there was no business decision. He was giving it his all and taking on Icky, and I was like, that man he's I think he's a little sick in the head. Like he just he wants the contact. Like if you're gonna take on Iquanu in the open field, you got balls of steel, so all the
Yeah.
credit there. And then
That's the thing. That's the thing about Booth is like he's physical. He's a
yeah,
playmaker. But when you look at you, when you really get down to the brass tacks, the technical element of the corner position too, he's pretty good there too. He's
yeah,
got, he's pretty disciplined with his technique. He doesn't jam before his base is set. He's very good at mirroring receivers, and he has the easy athleticism to do that too in the short range. So I came away from him like he's physical. He's got that alpha mentality. He's got excellent ball skills. Like I think he can be a lockdown corner on the boundary. I think
right.
the upside is there, and I don't think the floor is as low as people are leading on. So I think the only red flag would maybe be medicals, right? But he tweaked his
Yeah.
hamstring. He had that core muscle surgery. He's on track to be fully healthy for training camp. So
Yeah,
I'm
core muscle is not a big deal. We just went through that
yeah
with Rod Bateman, and he was right on schedule. It's a hernia.
yeah
Even I've had a hernia surgery, and
uh,
so he'll get there. But I did. The only thing I wanted to see was his 40 time because I did wonder about
yeah.
his long speed, but we didn't get to see that. But it's not necessarily a do or die. So who would be another one there at the corner spot that you're a little bit higher on than others?
Corner spot, I'd be a little bit higher on. Not quite as high on this guy, but still pretty high. Damari Mathis of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
I like his technique. I think it could clean up a little bit. Again, I think the processing, the technique could clean up a little bit. But again, he's physical. He's always jamming. I love that. He's another guy who kind of subscribes to the feet first mentality with your press technique, right? Like you don't want to jam before your base is set, right? You want to use those feet first. When you have an opportunity to jam a guy to the outside, play that receiver leverage. Don't be, it's weird because usually, you'd think being anticipatory, being proactive is a good thing. But when you're a corner, if you anticipate wrong, you can dig a hole for yourself. So you got to be reactive, keyed in on the receiver's movements. And I think Mathis is pretty good at that. Again, can be uncontrolled, can get worked off balance a little bit, can be a little over physical, get grabby at times, and that draws penalties. But again, he's got the ball skills, the vertical athleticism. I mean, he jumped a 43.5-inch vert for crying out loud. So he's athletic for sure.
Yeah.
He's explosive. He closes, got the physicality. For me, there's just some areas to clean up. Not quite as fluid as Booth too, but I do really like the traits that are there. So he's a very good corner prospect for me. Not a first round guy like Booth, but I think on day two, I love banking on the upside that's there.
Love it. Love it. And then anyone you're lower on in that corner group?
Shoot, I mean, there's a few options. Tariq Woolen is one, and I feel like
Okay.
that's an easy one, right? Because everyone's hyping him up, maybe a potential first rounder. He's not there for me. I like the upside for sure, especially in zone dominant schemes. Now, zone dominant, I feel like anyone that says man or zone dominant, I feel like it's kind of because every scheme you're asked to play a little bit of man or zone. You have to be versatile no matter what. So rarely are you going to find a scheme where you're playing 70% zone.
Especially in the NFL. It's not
Exactly.
like the Washington Huskies where they're just going to play cover 3 all game. But
yeah, exactly. Like you got to be ready for anything because NFL offenses can do anything. They're very varied right now, so you got to be able to react to that. So he does concern me a little bit in man because he's not the most fluid guy. Which when you're 6'4", I mean that's what's going to happen. That's why there's no 6'4" corners is because they can't sync on those direction changes as often, right? But for what he is, I think the athletic upside is tantalizing. I love it. There is a lot of work to do there, and at the same time, not sure if he's going to be the most scheme versatile. If I could pick another one, I'm blanking right now, but I don't know. I mean, this is another class where there's so many good ones. Like I could say Roger McCreary. I love how he plays. It's just the arm length is a little concerning for me. But again, I mean, he plays bigger than his frame, so I'm not going to ding him too much for that. Maybe Ahmad Gardner, but again, like he's still a top 15 guy for me. The CB1 talk is a little much for me because again, I don't think he's the most fluid, and he does jam prematurely at times in man technique. So I'd like him to clean that up. I love the upside again. I think he's well worth a early first round pick just because of that, but not quite the alpha CB1, that runaway CB1 that some people have him. He's my CB4. I like Derek Stingley better. I like Kyer Elam as well. I'm a big fan of his game. They're all clustered there for me, but I'm a little lower on Sauce.
And you have Booth up there in the top 4 above him as well?
Yeah, Booth is my CB1. Yeah.
Okay. There it is.
Yeah, it's him and Derek Stingley neck and neck at the top, and then Elam a little bit down, and then Gardner a little bit down. That's kind of how it stacks up.
No, I love it. This has been awesome, man. I really appreciate it. And, we talked about this before we started. We wanted to keep it 30. We went 39. I couldn't stop once we got going. So, so everybody out there at Ian_Cummings_9 on Twitter, I'm going to drop your PFN author bio below. tons of articles out there. Some of these top 10 lists are just incredible. Great write-ups on the draft. Everything you guys need to get ready for the draft, hear from Ian. And thank you so much for coming on, man. This has been a blast. Thank you for walking us through everything, giving us some of your thoughts on the upcoming class. And yeah, man, best of luck the rest of the way. We got 3.5 weeks to grind out the last little bit that we can.
Yes, for sure, man. It's the busiest time of year, but it's the best time of year too. So we're gonna hang on. We're gonna get through it. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I appreciate the chance to come on and talk about the grading scale, and especially talk about football. That's the best part about it. Thank you.
I love it. Well, everyone out there, be good to yourselves, be good to each other. Peace out.